Welcome to the Aspen Institute's McCloskey Speaker Series program, the kickoff to our summer, featuring members of the U.S. House of Representatives, Tom Cole of Oklahoma, Rosa DeLauro of Connecticut, Stacey Plaskett of the U.S. Virgin Islands, and Charlie Dent, former congressman from Pennsylvania. I'm Crystal Logan, Vice President of Aspen Community Programs here at the Aspen Institute. And I first want to thank Bonnie and Tom McCloskey for supporting this program. Thanks to our audience for tuning in for this important conversation. As I introduce our guests briefly today, you'll find links to their bios in the chat. If you have questions, please type those into the Q&A function anytime during the event. Congressman Tom Cole is serving in his 10th term in the U.S. House of Representatives. He holds a BA from Grinnell College and an MA from Yale University and his PhD from the University of Oklahoma. He is a fifth-generation Oklahoman and an enrolled member of the Chickasaw Nation. He is one of only 5 Native Americans currently serving in Congress. Rosa DeLauro is the Congresswoman from Connecticut's 3rd District, serving in that role for the last 31 years. Welcome. She earned degrees from Marymount College and Columbia University. Next up, Congresswoman Stacey Plaskett represents the United States Virgin Islands at-large Congressional District. She is serving in her 4th term in Congress. She earned her undergraduate degree from Georgetown and her JD from American University. Congressman Charlie Dent is Executive Director and Vice President of the Aspen Institute's Congressional Program. He served 7 terms in Congress and holds a BA from Pennsylvania State University and his Master's of Public Administration from Lehigh University. We are thrilled and honored to host all of you here today and feature you. And with that, over to you, Charlie. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Crystal. And I wanted to thank the congressmen and women for joining me here today with the Aspen Institute. So great to see these friends, Rosa DeLauro, Tom Cole, and Stacey Plaskett. We're really excited because we want to talk today about how members of Congress collaborate. And we were putting this program together. Well, I immediately thought of 2 people, Tom Cole and Rosa DeLauro, because of the work they do together on the Appropriations Committee. And we have Stacey, she's a delegate and she represents the Virgin Islands. And we wanted to hear from her, and plus she's a rock star. Welcome to all 3 members of Congress. Also wanted to just praise how Rosa DeLauro and Tom Cole have been able to work together, even though they come from different political perspectives. One a strong conservative, another a proud progressive, and they always manage to come to. They always seem to come to an agreement on a labor, health, human services, education bill every year. And they've done some really important work on increasing medical research and early childhood. And I just kind of wanted to get a sense for our audience about, how do you do it? How do you overcome whatever differences you have? You kind of know what you're each capable of doing or not doing. And we wish there were more members who could do what you do on a regular basis. So
I will defer to the chairman to answer first, then I'll follow up.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, first of all, let me just say thank you. It's wonderful to be with Tom and with Stacey and with you, Charlie. I would just say very, very briefly, really, we miss you. And I also want to say a thank you to you because you wrote earlier about bringing back community project funding in a limited and a transparent process. And I thank you for that. I think we all do. And with regard to Congressman Cole, we have worked very, very closely together on the subcommittee on Labor, Health, and Human Services and Education, better known as Labor HHS. When Tom was the chair and I was the ranking member, and now it's reversed. And I just would say, being with Stacey Plaskett, Congresswoman, she is a rock star. And personally, she has been there for the American Family Act and Paycheck Fairness. So Really is terrific. And just one last word with regard to Aspen. Thank you, Aspen, where you just create a more free and a just and equitable society, and through your nonpartisan and not ideological lens. So we're very, very grateful. It is, as you all know, the issues are, and I'll talk about the subcommittee first. It is not about who you are, Democrat or Republican, but what is critically important. First of all, I think you need to have respect for members on the other side. I think that is a critical ingredient in moving forward. And Tom knows this, that when I took the chairmanship of appropriations, I called every Democrat and I called every Republican on appropriations just to say, hello, I've gotten this great honor. We need to work together, and how should we proceed? And but Tom and I had developed a working relationship. I always use this as this anecdote. We had breakfast very early on, and I noted that we both ordered burned bacon. So I knew that was the basis of a partnership going forward. But in the conversation, what we discovered was, where we were on education and funding education and understanding that education is the route to success for my community, for Tom's community, for Native Americans, for immigrant kids. It was the way forward. And the programs like Title I and Gear Up, and IDEA, special education. We had a basis of understanding on that. And biomedical research. And Tom will talk about this, Stacey, that in 4 years, it's $11 billion to the NIH. We care deeply about biomedical research and what it can do and how it changes lives. We found this year compatible on what happened with the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, that there we are, and the agency almost near collapsed, if you will, and did not have the structures in place, whether it is data modernization or workforce or our national labs that were set up to deal with the scale of the crisis. So, but I go back to the fundamentals. You have to have, Tom Cole and I will differ on a whole number of issues, but we have a sense of each other in terms of what we believe the institution is capable of, and how it can help to make that difference for the people we serve. So that in that way, in that kind of an environment, we can forge relationships, we can forge public policy, and on some issues we may never agree. But for the most part, it allows us to pass an appropriations bill and appropriations bills that are central to how government proceeds. Without them, the government shuts down, and particularly now appropriations, $1.4 trillion goes through the Appropriations Committee, particularly now with people in the kind of economic circumstances that they find themselves in. So I've gone on too long, but it is fundamental relationships and finding that common ground where you can agree and move forward.
Yeah, let me add to that, and couldn't agree more with what the chairwoman had to say. But the 5 years before we became working partners, labor H bill had not been reported out of the Appropriations Committee in the House. And I think there's a variety of reasons for that. I'm not here to point fingers or anything, but I remember telling my chief clerk, look, I want to find out what this committee wants to do, what it'll work on together. And we didn't have enough hearings. Rosa will remember this because she was ranking member before I was chairman. But that committee was meeting like 5-6 times a year. And I told our clerk, I remember our first year, I think we met 15 times. I said, I want to double, triple. And then I just want to listen to the members. And we're going to have good hearings. And Rosa and I started having a good relationship. because she's a very serious legislator and she wants to, you know, get to the bottom of issues. So as we had the hearings and I just listened, I knew where we would disagree. I knew, okay, we're going to disagree on abortion. We're going to disagree on Obamacare. We're going to, you know, there'll be a variety of issues. We're going to disagree on labor regulations, maybe. But what I heard the committee say, everybody was really excited about biomedical research. Everybody wanted to do more on cancer, Alzheimer's, MS, Down syndrome. So I thought, okay, that's one. The second place I heard enormous agreement was on what I call first generation college students. That is, give kids that coming from families that have never had a chance to go to school. So all of a sudden, TRIO, Gear Up, as the chairwoman mentioned, those kinds of programs were things that both sides tended to agree on. Then early childhood education. You know, all the research is very impressive about what a difference it makes to intervene early, whether it's a Head Start program or classic early childhood run in conjunction with a public school or what have you. We know those kids not only do academically better, maybe even more importantly, they do socially better. That is, if they get married, they're more likely to stay married. They're less likely to use drugs. They're less likely to be involved in gang activity. They've had positive role models around them. They've had some structure. These programs are really classic stitch in 9, save time kind of, or saves 9 kind of programs. I mean, they help people get on the right track early in their life. And you know, there are other things, again, like career tech. We both know we represent constituents where the majority of our young people aren't going to college, but they need to have a way to, you know, make a decent living or a way to course correct career-wise if something happens technological that puts them, so to speak, out of business or their skills. So we found the areas we could agree on. And I tell you, the thing I'm proudest of, Charlie, is the 4 years I was chairman. Rosa certainly never voted for my first bill, and she never should have, because it was a Republican bill meant to pass a Republican House. And you know the guys we had to get that bill by. But once we got to conference, we bargained, and she voted for final passage of all 4 bills. The 2 years she's been chairman of the subcommittee, same thing. I mean, her first bill is going to be a bill that a Republican's unlikely to vote for, but she's got to work with her caucus, the majority caucus, to get that through. But I know when we got to conference, again, you know, we reached a common deal with Roy Blunt and Patty Murray on the other side of the rotunda. And we all 4 voted for final passage each time. Matter of fact, we've all 4 voted, I think, for final passage all 6 years that we've worked together. So not just our relationship, which has been exceptionally strong, but also the relationship that we've had individually and collectively with our Senate counterparts that have gotten us to the point that everybody gives a little. We all know the red lines, and we get there. And so you get final passage instead of stalemate.
Well, just following up on that theme, that's, you know, I used to have to say the same thing to some of my friends and constituents. Please don't look at this first launch and assume that's going to be the final product, that you're going to see things you don't like here, but things will get cleaned up at the end of the process. And what you both have just stated is that you've demonstrated, you have a pragmatic streak, both of you, even though one can be that, like I said, a strong conservative and proud progressive. You both are still able to come to an agreement. In other words, you don't let ideology stop you from reaching agreement, which is not a small thing in this world. And I just wanted to commend both of you for that. Having served on the Labor Health Committee, it was really a joy and a privilege to work with both of you. Let me quickly pivot to Congresswoman Plaskett for a second and just ask her about, you know, her experience in Congress, having served a little less time than the other 2, but I wanted her to at least talk about, you know, your perspective as a delegate, you know, as somebody representing the Virgin Islands. You don't have the ability to, your votes, I shouldn't say they don't count on the floor, but you certainly vote in committee. You obviously had a very high profile role last year during the impeachment proceedings. And could you just tell us what it is that you experience? How do you maintain and interact with your colleagues, given that your role is a little bit more limited in that you have less privileges on the floor?
Sure. Well, you know, I think that one of the things that you're hearing discussed quite often between Tom and Rosa when it comes to the appropriations is that you can see that these are individuals who are really in love with the policy, right, of legislating. And for those members who are interested in policy, there's always opportunities to be bipartisan. Those members of Congress who come for, let's say, face it, performative politics, then that work is not going to get done as much for them. But if you come, one of the first advice that I got, I'm in my 4th term now, is that you quickly get a reputation among other members, is whether you're a show horse or workhorse or others, right? And if you put yourself out there as someone who is very serious about policy and a workhorse, members are willing to work with you. And I think you can see that, and they're prime examples of that. I recognize that there are ways that I particularly need to collaborate with other individuals. I look at members, Connecticut doesn't have such a large delegation, but if you look at like the California or the New York delegation, those are tremendously large groups of members who have other individuals that they can rely on. When you are the sole member of a particular area, like myself being a member of a territory, then you must collaborate with people. There's no way that you're going to get things done for your constituents if you do not do that. Additionally, being a member of a territory, I don't have 2 senators that are going to support me. And so I quickly learned that members of the House have floor privileges on the Senate. And I have 2 or 3 senators that I'm quite friendly with, that when I go to the Senate floor to look for senators that I'm trying to get to support a legislation or be the individual who has the companion bill in the Senate, that those are the people that I can go to. Rosa DeLauro is a proud progressive. You described Tom Cole as someone who is a strong conservative. I happen to be a moderate Democrat, a pragmatic Democrat. I served in a Republican administration under George W. Bush, worked at the Justice Department. My first job after working for my predecessor's predecessor as a college student, when I came back to the Hill after graduating from law school, I was hired by Rob Portman, worked for Lamar Smith. So I recognize in my role that there are people that I need on both sides of the aisle to support me in the things that are important, and to be very specific and very focused on what can work and what cannot work. And I think that that has served myself and my constituency well. When I first came to Congress, I worked on what I consider the most partisan committee, oversight, and one of the most bipartisan committees, agriculture. And on the oversight committee, I think that there were members who, while we absolutely disagree on pretty much any hearing that we had, we still tried to respect one another. I had dinner with Trey Gowdy regularly because we respected each other as former prosecutors and the arguments, the logic of the arguments that we were working. But particularly on the agriculture committee, there were so many areas in which we could come together. And I'm so happy that I've continued to do that on the Committee on Agriculture and finding common ground to support farmers, food producers across the country, and is evidenced by a bipartisan final passage of the Agriculture Improvement Act of 2018, working on broadband expansion, on supporting our food supply systems after the COVID pandemic. Those are ways that we're all trying to work together. And Charlie, for me as a member of the territory, particularly after our natural disasters of 2017, we really were able to see Congress work in an incredibly bipartisan way through the passage, the bipartisan act in that space. It was really the Bicameral Disaster Recovery Reform Act, which really addressed resiliency, better preparations for the next hurricanes and flood, earthquakes, and wildfires. And it contains a focus on pre-disaster planning and mitigation, which of course went on both sides of the aisle.
Thank you. You just, Stacey, I learned something about you here. I did not realize that you had worked for both Rob Portman and Lamar Smith.
I still, when I go to the floor of the Senate, I immediately, of course, go to my former boss and I'm like, boss, I need your help on, finding someone to support this particular legislation.
Well, I do remember how active you were when we had that terrible hurricane down in the Caribbean that affected the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. I guess that was Maria, right? That was Maria.
Yes.
Irma and Maria.
Irma and Maria, yeah, because you didn't just feel it there. My school enrollments in Allentown, Pennsylvania swelled because of a very large Puerto Rican population. So many fled the island and came up to where family and friends were. And so we all dealt with it, but we were very effective at that time. I'd like to pivot back for a moment to Rosa and Tom. One fun thing about being on the Appropriations Committee, I would often say to my friends at home and some in Washington, that was the only committee in Congress that actually had to do something every year. That is, you had to perform. If you failed, or if we failed, that there would be a government shutdown, and that kind of forces a reality on you. It makes you be pragmatic. When I would explain to people that a lot of these members on that committee are very pragmatic, because you just can't be an ideologue. You have to actually pass something every year, and there are going to be things in those bills that you like, and there might be some things you don't like. But at the end of the day, somebody's got to have the ability to get to the agreement and then vote for it. And how do you, as chair, Congressman DeLauro, how do you convey that to members? And Tom has to do it on the right with the right wingers, who don't want to vote for it because the bill's not perfect in their estimation. I'm sure you have the same problem with the left, that there are going to be some things in there they don't like. How do you get them to bite down hard and swallow and say you need to vote for this?
Well, it's something that Tom said earlier, that you have to really reach out and listen to people. You have to understand what is important to them. One of the best pieces of advice I ever received was from Senator Chris Dodd, who was my boss many years ago. And when I asked him where I should go for a second committee assignment on appropriations, he said to me, Rosa, go someplace where you don't know everyone and they don't care about the same issues that you care about. Understand different parts of the country, understand members, who they are, what they're about. One of the best pieces of advice I've ever received. That brought me to chair the Agriculture Subcommittee of Appropriations, which no one thought, my God, in a million years, you get somebody from Connecticut to chair agriculture. But you learn about where other people are, what are the issues that they care about, and
I froze again.
What you are trying to accomplish, and how do those things melt? And sometimes it will work and sometimes it won't. And Tom knows this, the most recent experience we had, which was last week, we had one of the Republican members had a piece of legislation that talked about agricultural farm. And I understand the Republic of China is doing this and the government is doing this, but we have a situation today where this, if you isolate just the one country, the consequences in terms of the hate and the intolerance of Chinese Americans, which has gotten really out of hand, that you call attention, and that creates problems. Long and the short of it, we had both parties talk to one another, and we were able to move forward. They will continue this debate and discussion. So we have, on the one hand, agricultural farmland being gobbled up by the Chinese government, which is a serious issue. And on the other hand, not wanting to put a target on the backs of Asian Americans. And the people have come together to help us to try to move forward. And as an addendum to that, Tom, it's my understanding that there's going to be, the conversations have already started here. So you're trying to find, Charlie, as you know, the ways in which you can incorporate other folks' interests that are can only make the bill better. You don't want to, you know, if it's something that can't be done, you also, I believe you have to be upfront with people. You have to say, hey, look, you know, we can do this and we can't do this. You know, just don't string people along, listen to them and try to incorporate, go the distance. I don't give up. You know, you just can't. It's not just one conversation. Yes, no, that's it. No, how do we work this out? What is going to give you the space that allows you to vote for this bill? If we can accommodate that, we can get across the finish line. And if we can't, then we may have a, you know, an obstacle, a stumbling block, etc. But 9 out of 10 times, I believe we can provide, and it's on both sides. Look, some of my Democratic colleagues have, right, Stacey, have particular interests and so forth. How do we accommodate people's interests? And not, we're not ideologues. If you can't, you know, I don't believe you can serve in the legislature and be a purist. It's not one, you can't. That's not the nature of the beast, if you will. That's not the legislative process. You don't govern from the edges. You have to govern so that you're able to bring people's thoughts, ideas, values together to try to move forward in a common purpose, common interest for the good of the country. That's what it is about. It's the good of the country. I'll just say one more thing. I wrote a book, I think it's 4 or 5 years ago. Won't do it again. It was a hellish experience. But I found in the creation of the social safety net, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, that these were not crafted by naive people. There were Democrats and Republicans who came together to say the country faces a problem. How do we get to a solution? And they were not ideologues, and they created a place for people to bridge a gap. And that was a startling revelation to me when I went through that process.
Let me respond quickly, and I mean, to the chairwoman's point, you know, I think of Robert Dole and think of
George McGovern,
you know, who are about as ideologically different as you can be, working together on food stamps, WIC, a lot of our social safety
right.
net. But 2 points that Stacey made that I think are really important when you're trying to understand Congress. The first is to remember that it's really a small town. And I always say in a small town, everybody knows who contributes to the Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts. Everybody knows who ties to church. Everybody knows who you can borrow a lawnmower from, and everybody knows who will bring the lawnmower back. I mean, you get to know one another with an intimacy and a detail that the press or people outside the institutions never do. And the second point she made that I thought was really very profound and insightful, different committees have different personalities and different functions. You know, I think of oversight, with all due respect to my friend and judiciary, is what I call shirts and skins committees. I mean, they just come to fight. I think of appropriations and agriculture as places where people come to get something done. And the most liberal member of appropriations and the most conservative member are usually deal makers at heart. They usually know how to preserve the essence of what they believe. They're not going to violate their core principles, but still get to a deal to get something done. Because Charlie, as you said, in approach, you have to do it. I think ag is basically that way too. And if you look at the bill, you know, it's a balance between, you know, some of the most important production side of the equation, which Republicans tend to focus on because so many of them are from rural districts, and some of the most important social safety net. And it's an alliance. The original way the Farm Bill got passed was an alliance between big city liberals and rural conservatives of both parties. They each had something in it that was paramount importance, and they understood, whether they agreed or not, that what the other person had in it was, you know, important too, and certainly important to them. And I need their votes. They have a right to sit at the table and help craft the policy that meets their needs. So, you know, we have too many people that have forgotten that part of Congress. And I don't think it's ideologically one side or the other, but we got a lot of people that come there that to make a point, not to make a difference. There's a big difference between those kind of members. I mean, if you're just interested on, you know, the number of Facebook followers you have and how provocative you can be, how often that gets you in the press, well, that's terrific if that's your objective, but you're not going to get anything done for your district, and you're certainly not going to get anything done of consequence nationally for the good of the country. That takes people that will sit down, spend the time, master the subject, learn the intricacies of how the House and works and how it works with the Senate, and play by the rules. And we got a lot of people right now that like to pride themselves as being disruptors. I'm sorry, you know, that's not why the people in my district sent me there. They sent me there to get some things done, and they're willing to tolerate the fact that it might not be perfect, but at least moves them in the right direction and think makes the country a little bit better.
I mean, Charlie, one thing I want to say, I mean, I couldn't agree more. As a former attorney, you know that a contract is great when everybody is a little upset about it, when no one gets everything that they want, but people feel that it's something that they can live with. That's something that's going to be a lasting contract. And I think right now, you know, I'm now sitting on the Ways and Means Committee. I've retained my seat on agriculture. There are so many consequential issues going on in our country right now that really allows those of us who want to do good policy work to come together in specific areas. I'm really tremendously grateful for people, the leadership of our senior members like Tom Cole and Rosa DeLauro, who are taking us into those spaces for appropriations to allow some measure of community-based funding so that members can feel like they have skin in the game and are willing to support specific measures while we continue to work on broader issues that are good for us around the country. You know, the fact that I can partner with individuals like Rodney Davis, who's in rural Illinois, and Abigail Spanberg in Virginia on broadband issues, because we know that that cuts across our country. And those are things that this pandemic has showed us that we must respond to in this time. And so I think that members are finding those pockets and are really utilizing this space that we have right now to drive those things through.
I would just add what has been, and Charlie, I mentioned at the outset that you spoke about community project funding and being transparent, et cetera. And one of the things that's been most gratifying, because everyone said, oh my God, you're going to go back to, you know, a process that, you know, was failed in the past and, you know, got people in difficulty and there were bridges to nowhere, et cetera. But what we lost in the process over the 10 years is essentially, and look, I've been asked about why community-based projects, because what we tried to do here was to be genuine in the senses. This is not Rosa DeLauro or Stacey Plaskett or Tom Cole going into a room and saying, hey, look, I think I'll do this today. I'll ask for funding for this project or so forth. No, it has to come directly from the community and it has to be demonstrable. You have to demonstrate that the city council or the nonprofit groups, or because we're not dealing with for-profits here. So we put in the guardrails, and it's been so gratifying to see on both sides of the aisle the people who have participated in the effort. I think believe it's been fair and enormously fair, but also you hear the same thing from Republicans as you're hearing from Democrats. I had an opportunity to work with my community. We sat down, we spoke about what was going to be important, and these are the issues and areas that are important to me. Democrats have said to me, you know, where they have a Republican mayor. I had the chance to speak to the mayor or the city council, and these are the projects that we think are going to be useful. So it's so far, we're not through it all yet. We've done some of the bills that have some of the projects, and for the most part, I think people are happy with the way that is moved. And to point out something that Stacey said, you've got skin in the game. You know, you just, and you can, we all want to do what's best on behalf of the people that we serve. And especially if it's generated from that community, and you can get back to them and say, hey, look, this is the funding for your Boys and Girls Club. This is the water project that we've needed all these years and we haven't been able to get. That's what government does. That's who we are. And so why shouldn't we use that power of the purse that we have to make these things happen for people on a bipartisan basis?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I thought that you were very skillful and thoughtful, targeted and transparent in the way you laid out the process. And that I think it was very, I think it was long overdue, and I think you really threaded the needle very effectively.
Thank you.
And so I thought it was smart. And I just, before we go to questions from the audience, I thought I would just go back to Representative Plaskett for a second and ask her, you know, you're not even on the Judiciary Committee, yet you were selected to be an impeachment manager. You know, a lot of, we knew who you were, Stacey, but you know, your colleagues and your constituents, but the American people got to know you a little better, you know, because you spent a lot of time on, you know, national television for several days, and obviously it was a high honor to be selected by your leadership. How did that happen? And, you know, what was that experience like from your perspective?
Well, you know, I think one of the amazing things about Speaker Pelosi is her recognition of who her caucus is. And she really knows the individuals in her caucus. She isn't just able to count votes, but really has an intimate knowledge of people's strengths and weaknesses as well. And I think that she was able to come up with a team in that instance that, if you looked at us, really represented a range of America, both geographic, gender, age, and all of us had a certain skill set in terms of experience as attorneys that I think allowed us to mesh really well together. And, you know, I was not expecting the call from her, but when the speaker calls you and asks you to do something of that nature, you're going to say yes.
You do it.
You know, and you do it. You know, and I told her, listen, I see it as a calling. I see this as really a service to another level of service to my country. And I want us to operate that way. And I think, you know, if you ask members on both sides of the aisle, that while we were in there, we really did not try to engage in histrionics, that we really tried to pare down the information and the evidence that we were given to let the facts speak for themselves rather than let our voices and our rhetoric do the talking. And, you know, Charlie, just to give you guys, and Tom, you'll appreciate this, you know, when we were in that back room and the weeks of preparation being led by Jamie Raskin, and of course, the amazing staff that we have in the Congress, part of my job was to speak Republican for the team. You know, they're like, Stacey, you're the only one who actually speaks Republican. You're the only person who was a Republican at some point in time. And so you need to change the rhetoric quite often to some of the language that, you know, a Jamie Raskin or a Ted Lieu were trying to come up with, or an Eric Swalwell. But, you know, I just have to say that, you know, I think the honor goes to the speaker for recognizing the skill sets of the people that she has, and trying to bring a team together that she believed would mesh together. And I'll have you note, you know, we did not have leaks in that group. We worked very quietly and meticulously together. And I think members, when, you know, you're called to serve in different forms, I know Tom, you and Rosa have been called by your leadership in different areas that, you know, whether you want to do the job or not, you say, put me in to coach I'll be part of the team.
Speaking of leadership, I was just going to ask Rosa and Tom quickly before the questions from the audience. How do you deal with the leadership? You know, when the Republicans were in charge, there were times I felt that the Republican leadership wasn't always very helpful to the appropriations process, and we're very, we're made our jobs more difficult, and I didn't always appreciate the process, and they weren't appropriators, and it was kind of frustrating for me at times. I know for some of the other members of the committee. I was just curious from both of your perspective, Tom's and Rosa's. Maybe we'll start with Rosa because the Democrats are now running the House. How is the leadership? Do you find them to be helpful or impediments to the work that you're doing?
No, it's extremely helpful. As a chair of a subcommittee, I put the bill together. I obviously let the speaker, the majority leader, the whip, know what I'm doing. I call on them if we need assistance, but let them know what I'm doing. But I have to say, in that situation, and now as chair of the full committee, I have the backing of the leadership, and really I look at it as a kind of a trust that they see that I'm leading. Again, I don't hesitate for me, for my style. I want to put it together. I would reach out for help. I would keep them informed. I want them to be able to tell me if there's something that they think that we ought to be doing. But it has been extremely gratifying to be given the latitude to really chair this committee and to chair the subcommittee as I have in the past, with guidance and nothing but guidance or support from our leadership, and for that I'm grateful.
Yeah, let me respond to a couple of points. First, and this is said with a bit of envy to my good friend, the chairwoman. She's got a leadership that was full of appropriators. The speaker was an appropriator.
Right. Amen.
The majority leader was an appropriator.
And Mr. Clyburn too.
That's right. So they understand that committee with a depth and a sophistication that I think Republican leadership hasn't had. Steny Hoyer and I were talking about this once, and he made the point. He said, the great downfall for Republican appropriators when Bob Livingston, the chairman of the Approach Committee, did not become speaker back in 1999, that the whole course of the Republican Party and the House might have been fundamentally different had he done so. We'll never know about that. But again, you can agree or disagree with my good friend, the former chairman of the full committee. But no question, Chairman Livingston understood this process better than any of the speakers or Republican leaders that followed. Second point I would make, and this is, each speaker has a different way of approaching this. And at least that's been our experience on our side. Look, John Boehner is one of my best friends in Congress, but he didn't like appropriators. He didn't like appropriations. He liked individual appropriators. And so what do you get? Removal of earmarks, a big disaster in my view, and a year-long CR when he's speaker. Now, a continuing resolution, I think, is a failure of leadership. It means you have not used in the majority the tools that you have. You are taking the last year's budget, and the only thing you've got is a top line. You actually then aren't changing, correcting, adjusting. You can do a few things through an anomalies bill, but so if you'll remember, I don't remember, Charlie, if you were on the committee, but Hal Rogers was chairman when that happened, and he led what I call the revolt of the appropriators, where he took us all in to see Boehner and Eric Cantor and our leadership team at that time. And, revolt of the appropriators is kind of like, the March of the Penguins. You don't see it very often. And, it looks pretty odd when you see it. And we all marched in there with our little shoulders going like this and said, you know what you just gave up to the Democrats? You know how much authority you've just acceded to the administration? Now, to their credit, they never did that again, and they learned. But they made that decision without ever talking to the chairman of appropriations. We're going to do a CR. You know, frankly, we were removed from the old appropriations office by Speaker Boehner. And that was a slap, and that was meant to bring us down. So I think that weakened it on our side. Now, I will say with Ryan and McCarthy, I think they have both honestly have a better sense of knowing what they don't know. They're not appropriators, but they don't interfere in the process nearly as much as Boehner did. And I say this, John Boehner's my friend, and I was proud to support him as Speaker and think did many, many good things. But the appropriations process needs to have some flexibility. It needs to be allowed to work. And if you're a budget hawk and you want to do something on the budget, work with my friend Stacey on Ways and Means and get entitlement spending under control. It's not the appropriators that unbalance the budget. It's the failure to either put sufficient revenue in. We can talk about what it is. I actually am more flexible on forming appropriate or entitlement programs than most of my fellow Republicans because you need some additional revenue. I'm sorry, we're living through a period where the baby boomer generation's retired. Extraordinary strain on Social Security and Medicare. And so those are things we need to talk about seriously, but you can't expect to balance the budget on the Appropriations Committee. It's a $4.4 trillion budget. We're about 1.4, as the chairwoman said, of that total. Over half of that is the defense of the country. You cannot balance the budget on the back of what's left, which includes our committee that we chaired and ranking member together jointly and labor, an important committee. But so anyway, those are just some thoughts off there. But leadership, Charlie, to go back to your point, I don't mean, as you said, this is the one committee that has to get something done every year or the government shuts down. The default position for that is a CR, which means it doesn't do anything different than it did the year before. And when have conditions not been such that we should alter something that we did the previous year? Or we do a full, robust appropriations process, which we've been able to do the last several years. When people say Congress can't function, I point to last year, very difficult year, high partisanship. But Congress got 5 coronavirus bills done of over $4 trillion. Congress got the appropriations process done with no hint of a government shutdown. Congress even overruled a Republican presidential veto of the NDA. The Republican Senate and the majority of Republicans in the House did that. So don't tell me we can't get stuff together, when we sit down and are practical about it. And I'm proud of the Appropriations Committee because I think it tends to do that more routinely by design, by necessity, than maybe any other committee.
You see this, Charlie? I knew this was going to happen. 3 appropriators and me. We just make the money in Ways and Means, and then our younger children in appropriations spend it. I feel like a parent here. I feel like a parent.
only if you help me make the child tax credit permanent. That's what you need to do. I just want to tell you one anecdote from Paul Ryan. When he was a speaker, he said to me, "I didn't realize how complex the appropriations process is." I said, "Welcome to the NFL." I mean, we're wild, Stacey. You're right, but it's it really is. Constitutionally, I've always make this quote. It is really at the center of the government, and without it, we do not function. And what's critically important? That members, both senior members and newly elected members, I found when I ran for this position, really found the process opaque. Stacey, you heard people say this over and over again. What does it do?
Yes.
How does it work? Over and over and over again, I had to answer that question. And so therefore, the transparency of letting people know how the sausage is made with appropriations.
Now, I just wanted to say, when Tom Cole's answer to my question was very artful and eloquent,
Yes.
far more than I could have ever done, because when I would get frustrated with the leadership and the Budget Committee in particular, I wasn't so eloquent. I would often refer to the Budget Committee, and I said this in front of Paul Ryan and Tom Price. When a former budget committee chair and the other who was the current budget committee chair. And I said it was the most useless committee in Congress. So they only had 2 jobs to do every year. One to set the top line level for spending, the 302A number, and reconciliation instructions. And most of the time they failed to do either. So, and I said, I would get so frustrated with them and the leadership that Tom would have his legs taken out from under him by the leadership and not just he, but Hal Rogers and others. And yeah, you're right that the Democratic leadership is filled with appropriators, so they kind of understand the process and the complexities, and the Republican leadership really just didn't have that experience, and it made life that much more difficult. So in this last moment, I thought we could at least get one question from the audience before we wrap it up. So Crystal, do you have a question from the audience?
Yes, I do. We have a few questions, but this one is really fitting because I know we're all trying to get back into the office, and childcare for all is certainly an issue. And so this one is coming in for Congresswoman DeLauro. Can you talk about your work on universal paid leave and guaranteed access to childcare? Do you think we'll see progress on this issue anytime soon?
Yeah, look, I think we've already made progress. I think if anything that this pandemic has demonstrated is that we do not have an economy without a childcare and a thriving childcare industry. It is as important as the airline industry or the restaurant industry or wherever else. And we have, as Tom pointed out, and with Ways and Means help on these issues on paid leave, particularly, but we worked hard to understand that these industries were going down during this time, and that what we had to do was to revive them. This is the same is true of childcare. Keep this in mind, that in 1943 to 1946, the woman in the Congress, Mary Norton from New Jersey, she, Battling Mary, she was called, and what she did was set up a network of child care centers around the country. Why? Because the men were fighting in the war, the women were in the industry, they were in the manufacturing, they were producing what we needed to fight the Second World War. It existed from 43 to 46. The war ended and the network collapsed. Today, we are fighting for childcare to revive this economy. No one is going to leave their kid at home with nowhere to go, nothing to do, and be seen 2.3 million women out of the workforce because, for a large part, because of childcare. They have to stay home. So it's critical. I believe we are making serious progress on it. On paid family and medical leave, introduced in 2013, again, what was demonstrated by the pandemic is that you lose your job through no fault of your own. And what happens? You need to have some way of being able to survive. You have illness in your family. For me, sick with ovarian cancer, my boss, Senator Dodd at the time, as a staff person, said, go get well. Just get well. Your job is here and you're going to be okay. I was a staffer, not a member. Being a member, my mother got sick at age 103. I spent the last 6 weeks of her life with her every single day. And no one said to me, you're out of a job. And if this is good enough for members of Congress or their staffs, then it's good enough for the rest of the country. And we are on our way to getting there with giving people up to 12 weeks. It's not everything, 2/3 of your salary. And it's really critical. And I believe, I know Ways and Means, and I don't see Stacey, but Ways and Means has the pen on this issue, and they're going to move forward with paid family and medical leave.
Great, thank you. I just want to get one other quick question in for Representative Cole. Let's see, as a co-chair of the Congressional Native American Caucus, how do we reconcile the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous people How can we make that right?
Well, we've actually taken some pretty good steps. Our departed colleague, Deb Haaland, who's now, of course, Secretary of the Interior, a big deal for Native American communities, got all of us, all Native Americans, we had 4 at the time, passed the original core legislation. We're following up an appropriations committee with the money that it takes to do this special state task force. I know here in Oklahoma, it's a major, major issue with law enforcement. So it's actually something that, again, the violence against Native American women has been horrific, partly, particularly the population that lives on historic reservations. Law enforcement is so weak there. I mean, 1 out of every 3 women that lives on a reservation was sexually assaulted or raped during their lifetime. You know, the numbers are just, and the murder rate is in some places 8-10 times higher than for non-Native women. So this has been a problem that we've faced for a long time. Also, my current co-chairman, Sharice Davids from Kansas, you know, Sharice and Deb were the first 2 Native American women ever elected to Congress. There's only been 17 tribal members in the history of the United States in 1789. And both of them have just been terrific on this issue. And I think have lent it an urgency and a relevance that frankly, it didn't have before. So while a lot of us supported it, and we got great support on both sides of the aisle on this issue, I think it really took those 2 Native American women to drive it home with an urgency and a intensity that broke through all the legislative barriers. So again, it's one of a lot of problematic issues in Indian country, but we've made a lot of bipartisan progress in VAWA, in this particular piece of legislation on missing and murdered Indigenous women, on increasing the Indian Health Service in the last 5 or 6 years. We've actually done it under, again, Democratic and Republican administrations, largely because it's sort of like the consensus that Rosa and I developed on the NIH on labor age. If Democrats and Republicans on the committee of jurisdiction with the money decide something's going to happen, no administration can get in the way. They have to do what they're told. So we increased, you know, like NIH funding more than Obama asked for, kept the cuts that Trump wanted from happening, and actually put more money on top leading into the pandemic. Same things happened on Indian stuff. Congress on the Interior Subcommittee of Appropriations, where we have 2 excellent members right now, Shelley Pingree from Maine and David Joyce from Ohio are great members of that subcommittee, served with them both when I was on it. You know, prioritized Native American funding. And we have an administration, quite frankly, that has a good track record. The Biden administration has put forward really good proposals on Indian health. So we're going to make some good progress. And Deb Haaland in this administration is going to be a big reason why we do.
Wow, thank you so much. Well, we'll have to wrap up now. Thank you all so much for joining us. Thanks, Charlie. Thanks to Representatives Cole, DeLauro, and Plaskett. It's really fascinating hearing your perspectives, and really positive to see that you all have so much rapport and getting so much done. So thank you so much. Thanks to our audience for tuning in. And thanks to for all the great questions. All of our community events this summer are free and open to the public. So if you are in a position to support our work, please click on the link in the chat. Please also join us for the rest of our summer events. You can find a full listing of our in-person and hybrid and virtual events on aspeninstitute.org/community. Thanks for joining us.